Welcome to Multiplexes, a video podcast series that reflects on the arts ecosystem, especially the physical, socioeconomic, and psychological dimensions, so as to foster affinities and empathy among us. My name is Michael Lee. I'm a Singapore-based artist and curator. In this first of 3 episodes, titled Spatial Complexes, we'll be discussing the working space of artists, otherwise known as artist studio or design studio. We all need time, material, and space to create. And this applies to all professions, not just artists. But how do we create and carve out a space that is conducive for creativity? How does the working space of an artist affect, reflect, and mediate the kind of work that you do? As well as basic questions like, what is a studio and what is it for? Joining me here is a pool of creatives. Actually, how many of us are here? 5, because 4 in the studio physically and 1 online. I'll start with Gideon-Kong. Gideon-Kong is one half of gideon-jamie, which is a design studio, and you work in this space.
Yeah, so I run the studio with Jamie Yeoh, and we also publish through Temporary Press. It's a small-scale publishing press. Our work mostly involves making books, of course designing them, but also printing, sometimes editing, sometimes writing, and bits and pieces of things around books. Our studio consists of several, components. There is a workshop area, which is the main space over here, where things are lying around, where you can't see them. There is a small exhibition space that is partitioned. It measures about 3 meters by 5 meters. And then there is a really makeshift bookshop somewhere near the entrance.
So like Gideon, artist and writer 𝘚𝘱𝘢 shares a studio with your partner.
I'm actually more like interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. I play with a lot of mediums. I write, I do sound, I use photography a lot in my work, I make videos. Generally, I like to put my hands into everything and try it. And sometimes these mediums would merge. So my partner and I would collaborate on certain projects. So there's 2 tables. One side of the table is my partner's side and one side is my side. And then the space itself, the studio space extends outside to the house. So if I need to do something that's performative with my body, I would move in the kitchen, or I would move in the living room because there's a big open space there. So extending that even further, there's a big field outside my house, and I actually had made work based on something that has to do with that field. So it's also a kind of extension of the studio. So I work within the neighborhood space as well.
So like 𝘚𝘱𝘢, Fiona also works from home, but it's your parents' home.
I work with drawings and small modular sculptures with paper and tiny objects like stickers. So a lot of ink drawings. And my studio setup is in my bedroom. So on one side of the wall, there is a tiny extension to half of a storeroom where I put all my works and my daily living necessities.
Rui-An.
I am an artist and writer, and I work mostly in contemporary art, but also in theatre and in film. So most of my works take the form of films, performances, installations. I also write essays. So I would say it crosses quite a few disciplines, and it's not confined to a particular medium or form. Generally, my projects tend to be quite long-term and involve some degree of field research. I often have to travel to wherever the research is cited. So I would say, like, within the past few years, I don't really have quite a permanent studio setup, but occasionally, when I'm on an artist residency, I would have a space that would be more like what you can call an artist studio. But otherwise, when I'm in Singapore, I mostly just work out of my bedroom, which is also more like a place where I store all of my artwork and materials.
As for me, I find myself increasingly moving from object-based work to work that is less space reliant, such as this, right? Being kind of like in charge of conceptualizing a program. Although I work from my spare bedroom, I would see it more as a space for me to do admin work, go online for meetings. And I'm kind of working towards decluttering and de-studioing, actually. A program like this allows me to make that happen. So I don't know about you, but a typical image I think a lot of people have of an artist studio is this interior space where a painter goes about doing his or her work next to a large window. The window can be on top also, skylight studio and all that, right? Where daylight streams in so that you can check your colors and details and everything is all right. And yet, since the 1960s, conceptual art, which privileges idea more than the physical object, right? There seems to be the tendency of kind of doing away with the studio and working out in the world, or the other way around where the studio is just reduced to a laptop, right? And of course, in between this, the two extremes could be that the physical studio becomes a place that is not only for the construction of art objects, but also an important space for administration, research, and socializing. How would you personally define an artist studio?
Not in relation to my own studio, but how I feel a working studio should be is a place where, and this is taking off a bit from Virginia Woolf, is a space where idleness and dreams can happen. So it's not necessarily just to make work, but also to let ideas kind of intersect one another. Let it like kind of permeate and cross-pollinate in a space. And if it's a physical space, it's great because then you can sort of have everything there, So it's unlike, because I also work outside, like my work actually brings me outside of the studio. Having a studio means I can kind of have everything come back to a space, yeah.
It's interesting for me that you cited Virginia Woolf, because I know Ray An thinks about Virginia Woolf as well in terms of the definition of a studio.
Yeah, I guess we're citing the same Virginia Woolf text. Yeah, Room of One's Own. But yeah, I think like for me, because actually quite similar to Ila, like a lot of my work happens outside the studio, or like whether is it the research or whether I'm filming something or collecting materials. So like for me, the studio is really more like a place of like reflection and consolidation. So it's for me to bring everything together and to really have a more private space and private moment to process everything. So like for me, it's very important that for me it's a bit of like a space of retreat in a sense. Like it's somewhere where I can be alone at some level and also to look through and reflect on what I have been doing.
I think for me, an artist studio is a physical space where creative practices happen. So I think the physical aspect of it is the main thing for me.
What about you, Gideon?
I see it as kind of like an extension of our hands and minds, where some things as simple as tools can be left around and I can have access to them, materials, tools, things that are objects, physical in nature, and need storage space. Books as well, they are in a way also tools. I also see it as a space where work in progress can be left around and there's no like real need to clean up or pack up.
It's not cheap to rent a studio, and having a physical studio even at home can mean loss of space for other things, right? Do you think that there is really a need for a physical studio, or can this studio be virtual, like a Google Drive?
I guess when you're talking about the Google Drive, it just makes me think of my practice, which largely happens on Google Drive at least. But I also Like for me, like a studio is also becoming more of a storage space or a storage facility. So like essentially my bedroom is the space for that. Where because when I'm doing research, you collect a lot of materials, and actually a lot of these materials are still physical. There's a very strong physical dimension to these materials. So they're not all virtual in terms of like text and videos and all that. And also because for me, I actually think better when I'm moving around.
So I kind of start in my bedroom usually, but then gradually you can see me moving my laptop to my bedroom, lying down, working outside or sit. I just have to move my body constantly because you feel so static when you're settled into one spot, especially when when I'm thinking and writing or crafting ideas. But I think when you mention in terms of what one can lose by having a space taken up as a studio space, I think at least for my partner Bani and I, there is that agency of using all the space in a house. So echoing Rayyan, our space, our house is also our artist storage space. That's where we put all the physical works that we've made, like either in the storeroom, under our table, under the bed, under the sofa bed. So it's everywhere in the house in no particular order, as long as it fits, right? In terms of the things that we can and cannot do, having a studio in our house, if there's things like construction or renovations happening, people cutting grass, which happens every 2 weeks, it will happen one time. We can do things that involve sound, so recording is out of the order. Can do things that require a lot of listening, so things that if I'm required to watch something, I can't do it when there's so much noise. So I bring my stuff outside, or I go to another friend's studio, like, oh, can I work at your studio? So there is that kind of freedom, but also not.
For Fiona, I understand that although you do make your work in your studio, you're constantly collecting information or making work while you're on the move.
Yes, I'm moving towards bringing my works outside of my bedroom, but I still really need that physical space where I do the preparation, like cutting bigger pieces of paper into smaller ones, and then putting them in boxes, and then eventually bringing my things out. But I still do need that clean floor, clean table, where I do all my preparation and when I put everything together eventually. But I'm slowly starting to move out now. Yeah.
Slowly starting to move out means what?
Making more works outside, but I still really need a table. So there's a lot of making, precision cutting, drawing. So having a stable table that's the base of my studio. Yeah. And then the thinking part, it happens a lot like Rayyan and Ila as well. It happens outside. I move outside, and then when I have an idea, I put it down in my notes. When I'm on the bus, on the train, the thought process can just come naturally. So the studio is really just for the physical making. Yeah. And also storage, yes. So a lot of my work, so yes, I think a lot of us use the studio as storage. Because a lot of things that we make is not really like super sellable, right? Like say 10 works. Out of 10, maybe 9 end up in boxes in storage. So my studio is also for storage, yes, but I'm trying to make the work smaller and easier to keep so that my studio / bedroom remains organized.
The studio, yeah, I have to admit that it is definitely a luxury. But if I were to also go back to your previous question, I think it's not necessarily a need. We started out, especially for design practice, we started out with laptops and just roaming around in cafes and whatever we can find ourselves to be comfortable enough to think and to make work. But over the years, I've also realized that a lot of times I'm the most productive when I have easy access to my books. And previously, when I was working from my parents' home, they were really particular about not leaving books outside. Like they have to be stored in shelves neatly. So you don't really get access to them, or you have to like pull out stacks and stacks in order to reach the one that's inside. So I found like if I could just have my books on shelves and I have easy access to them, that actually helps me to be a lot more productive. And again, it's a luxury, but if I were to also think about it in relation to our practice, which is to do with publishing, and if printing is expensive in Singapore, and so if we want to have some degree of control over production and therefore also costs, we print on our own. And maybe it's cheaper for me to have a large space and to have space to print and leave them lying around, as compared to always approaching a printer for a job. And if I want to make exhibitions, to have access to gallery, so what would be more expensive than if I were to have just one space. But I also have to admit it's the largest cost of the studio, and we sometimes still do struggle with it.
Thinking in retrospect or in hindsight about studio also makes me consider what it was like before having a studio space, right? And I see this like this, and I think without that studio, when I didn't have my own house, right, I feel like I can work anywhere. I can kind of like a parasite borrow someone else's studio to make certain work. So last time friends used to run like independent spaces where I would like tumpang myself there to create like bigger pieces. Or we were also sharing space with Zunyan at Aliwal Art Center for a bit. So it was never fully our space or studio. So when to think about like what I need in a studio, I also think whether is it the space that makes me want these things, or is it if I was placed here, maybe I would want different things for my studio. You get what I mean? Does the space create the wants, or is the wants placed into the space?
I think the first thing that I did was to reduce the size of my works. So when I had a space, when I was still in school, I could make like this about 2-3 meter kind of sculptures. After that, it just shrank right down to like 2-3 cm. Things that I could really just fit in a pencil case. So actually, even when I was still in school, I was already thinking about what happens after, because I had the dream of like owning a space, renting a space, not owning one. But I was still making plans, like what if I cannot afford it?
You also have a series where you would upload stuff to your online social media account.
Yeah, that was for the most recent show with 𝘚𝘱𝘢𝘵 and other artists. I was collecting numbers. So I do like putting things in order, being very organized. So seeing repeated numbers, they excite me a bit. So I've been collecting these numbers in my phone. So they are not like tangible items I can touch and keep. So they exist on social media. I'm using threads. So actually nobody even sees them. And these are things that I don't have to keep in boxes. So yeah, I'm trying to move towards such works, but I still like making. I think making, creating, using my hands is a very important part of my practice. So I don't think I can really do without a physical space. Yeah.
Yeah, just now, 𝘚𝘱𝘢, you spoke about sharing studio, right? So there is this inevitable social aspect of that configuration. So maybe I'd like to ask about the studio as a social space, right? What are your thoughts on that? Whether it be that within the studio there is a part of it that is used to meet other people, meet the world, or a studio that is part of a larger creative community, like in Bugis, Bencoolen, or at Goodman or Aliwal, right? Do you think that studio as a social space is something important, or do you think that it might rob you of your quiet?
Talking about larger social like realities or something. I mean, my house is my house. I'm raising my 8-year-old daughter in that house. So we're parents, we're artists, we're colleagues. We're taking on many roles in different parts of the day. But way prior, we wanted, when Bunny and I got that place, we wanted to have like a studio house space where people can come and hang and do things. So I created like these small projects where we have this thing where I invite someone to come up with an ingredient and a topic of discussion, and it's so cliche, but I was experimenting on form of activating the space, and then I will cook the ingredient, and then we would eat, and then we would talk about the theme, and then this person has to invite another person. So it's, I think twice out of the 8 times that we did this project, I didn't know who these 2 people were, but they came to my house for the first time, and then we sort of have a conversation. That's one aspect. That's more like a curated way of activating it socially. My space is the only, like I'm like one of the few who had their own space. So a lot of my art friends in the arts would come to Flock and hang out. So much like what Rui-An experienced in Berlin, I had that for a while until my daughter got bigger and she requires quiet at night, so we don't have like social dinners like we used to have. Our house also had that social function for a while, but then it doesn't have that anymore. And it was great when it was happening, but we also appreciate the quiet and the kind of privacy that we have right now.
Rui-An, this must be the first time that you are being asked about something so private, right? Your working space, right? What are your thoughts on this topic of studio as a place to socialize?
Yeah, actually, when I'm in Singapore, the always the dilemma I have is when let's say a curator wants to meet me, and then I'm like, yeah, you have to meet like outside at a cafe or the National Library or something like that. But then I lived in Berlin for a year doing a residency, and I had my own, essentially a studio and apartment, and I realized what a great setup it is, because like finally there's like a place where you can like receive like visitors, or like even though like I don't have a lot of like I don't have a very studio based practice, for me like it becomes a more kind of proper setup to meet people who wants to know your practice. So like, and also like, even though most of the things on my laptop, there are still physical things that I can easily show someone if they come to a place where I have everything kind of consolidated or accumulated there. And yeah, and also it was also like when I was living in Berlin, my house was also a place for like friends to gather actually, which in Singapore I've actually never ever had that experience really, because I just didn't have a apartment of my own. So that was like a few of the luxuries that I enjoyed, and yeah, I kind of still wish if I could, I would like to have that. Yeah, even just to like meet friends and I guess sing karaoke or whatever.
We'll definitely talk about karaoke, or actually sing karaoke later. Okay, that reminds me of Fiona, because I think you were sharing with me that for a meeting with a curator, you were also bringing your gear and your work out.
So you've been to my studio, and you know that my things are all packed in boxes, and there are boxes in boxes in boxes. So I'm quite organized in that way. Before, when I had my own studio, I could just like, okay, sure, Michael says he wants to come over, come. Friends who wants to come over, come. If you don't mind the distance, come. But after losing that space, when people ask, oh, do you have a studio I can come visit? I will tell them, no, I don't have a studio anymore. But I mean, in actual fact, my bedroom is my studio, but I don't know why I say I don't have a studio, right? Because it's not an official studio anymore. So instead, I would bring my works to them. So in this process, I did lose a few chances for people to come and visit.
What about Gideon? I understand that you organize social activities here quite a lot.
Yeah. I think I think I'm not a very sociable person, but somehow space makes up for it. Like if there's space, then actually I don't have to talk that much. When people come, they talk amongst themselves, and things happen, or when there's events, or when there are books to look at. So that is kind of like a way for things to happen. I want to do that, but sometimes I'm also conflicted because I like the quietness in the studio, and I'm not sure if I can ever share a studio with someone because a lot of the work involves noise, printing and whatever, and I might be too afraid to make noise. And so having that space for people to come in during talks or events and talk amongst themselves, I think that is quite important for us. They are very occasional, infrequent, also because of our commitments. But whenever we can, we have small, kind of informal shows related to design mostly, but also not quite design. I think that is also an area that we want to explore further.
Obviously, the things we collect, the space we maintain or not, reflects, at least to a certain extent, who we are or what we do. For you, do you see your studio space as an extension of yourself, or do you think that the studio is an opportunity for you to dissociate from yourself?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like an extension of one's practice. If you can see the space as something that is work in progress of the artist or designer, whether it's for themselves or for others. It's a work that is, in a way, incidental to the practice, or maybe even core to the practice.
I think for me, it's definitely like a direct reflection of my personality. For me, sharing spaces is a big no. You know, I like to control my environment. So I think being organized, that's a very big character trait of mine. Working in my space, my bedroom means that my personal life and my art identity has to happen at the same time. So for me, there is a lot of compartmentalizing, organizing, whether it's in the physical space or in my head space. Thinking of what to do at what time, and when I actually do work, dealing with the physical mess, my brain is just constantly organizing. Yeah, and there's also a bit of pressure working in my bedroom. When I'm not working, I'll be like, hey, oh no, I'm not working. My materials are just there, but I'm not working, so I'm not being productive. And then when I do work, oh no, the physical mess I've got to clean up. So so working in my space is, I'm just working with my identity.
Ila, you're an artist, but you're also a mother. Does that reflect in how you work with your space?
When you say whether it's an extension or whether it's a space to disassociate, I think it's both. It has to be both, because if not, I won't be able to rest in my house. I will constantly be wanting to, having the failure to shut down, right? Because the work stuff is right, arm's length. But sometimes it happens that way. Like you're so engrossed in finishing something, then the house space sort of starts to get lesser, disintegrate, and then the workspace becomes more concretized. In terms of personality or extension of self, I think that is apparent in a lot of spaces that one occupies frequently. Yourself, your habits, your routines, your rituals start to develop within that space, so it will look like you've been inhabiting the space. I feel like there's no way to kind of not have your you-ness in the space.
When you were sharing about how one function takes over the other and there's this fluidity, that really resonates with me, but it makes me feel a bit guilty sometimes. I mean, for you, it's like when you're not working, you might feel like something is wrong, right? But I realized that my current studio is more like decluttering in process. So my partner calls it my workshop, maybe because it's always messy, but I actually consider it as my Zoom booth or Zoom room, because that's where a lot of Zoom meetings and laptop work happens, as well as decluttering, which I foresee will take a lifetime. So maybe that reflects what I'm trying to do as a person, as an artist as well. How about Ray An?
I think because the spaces where I work tend to be quite incidental. I usually don't get to choose it. So I wouldn't say that. So it's less that they are an extension of my identity than I feel like the space more often forces me to become another person sometimes, or like sometimes the space place demands on you to change a part of how you work in order to accommodate that space or something like that. And I mean, actually this relates to what Gideon mentioned just now about having a large space. And when I had that luxury when I was living in Berlin, I had this I was given this like really large kind of apartment slash studio. Like I almost felt an obligation that I had to share it, or and actually I'm also not a sociable person at all. I don't like organize parties, but suddenly I feel obliged to organize parties or like dinners, and I also don't cook, so it's really odd that I am organizing dinners. But I essentially did that in Berlin because because and then I had a lot of like friends, from Southeast Asia, who wanted to sing karaoke but couldn't find a place to do that in Berlin, and then so my place also became a place for that to have like a home karaoke. So I think that space actually changed like a part of me because it made me a little more extroverted, or someone who like puts together gatherings when I would never I practically don't do that in Singapore.
It's interesting you shared about how you become a different person when you end up in a different studio space, right? Because that almost seems like a postmodern concept of the artist's identity being outside rather than a potential inside. I'd like to just jump to another topic which could be interesting or limiting, which is the idea of a stereotype. I just want to start with two stereotypes. The first stereotype is, if you have a studio, you are a serious artist. So among us, Gideon, very serious, and decreasing seriousness, maybe, ending with Ray An. Okay, that's one. Number two, but if you own your studio, then you are a successful artist.
Because I used to own a studio and now that I don't, I feel there is no difference. I think because of the way I use the space. So when I had that space, I was basically just lounging in it, watching movies. It was really no different from how I spend my time in my room. So when I had to move out, my practice definitely didn't change. It was only like the decreased chances of people coming in to view the works and all that. But otherwise, it's the same. I don't think I'm any more successful or any less serious.
But you rented the studio, you didn't own it.
No, I rented. Yeah, if anything, I was quite happy that I'm saving money and like quite proud of myself for changing my practice to adapt to my current situation.
I think it also depends on how we measure success, and I definitely wouldn't measure it based on like income or money. Someone can have a large space but not be as productive, maybe, perhaps. For us, it might look like the practice is doing well, but I might be struggling with rent, which I am, and it's just like something in terms of choice. Like I choose to commit this much into rent and try to push the practice in certain ways, but it does not necessarily reflect like a practice that is doing well in terms of income, at least. So I think I mean, it's always a dream to own like a semi-permanent, like nothing, not permanent, but semi. But I think, that's like a far away dream.
What's the first stereotype? We haven't really broken that. Seriousness and having a studio. I don't know. The reason why I have a studio now is because I've been practicing for very long and it's accumulated stuff like over the years, and and it's also my house, right? But the reason why we convert that room is so that we could work but store stuff. So I don't know how I'm gonna break that stereotype statement, but I feel like the seriousness is not measured by having a studio or not. You can still be serious without a studio. you can be unserious with a studio.
Talking about unserious, we can break the stereotype by questioning whether it is important to be serious as an artist. Right? Is it important? Or is it okay to be unserious as an artist? It seems like for you, the marker of success or seriousness or good is a space that allows karaoke to happen. Is that right?
I think that's not a marker of seriousness for sure. But actually, I feel like a lot of our stereotypes of an artist studio, it's established through popular culture, and also like through images that are very 20th century, of this kind of great artist in a studio, usually a painter. Like you think of, images of like Jackson Pollock in his studio, for example. When actually I think a lot of artists don't work in that way anymore. And actually and in these depictions, you don't really see other things that happen in the studio, like as you say, the studio can be a social space. The studio could be just a space where the artist is just like resting or like, just having some time to themselves. So like, I feel like, actually, I don't feel like this stereotype is that strong anymore these days, because I think we all understand that the nature of contemporary art practice is so diverse and multifaceted that each of us, you try to create a space that suits your own needs. So for me, like I don't think of it as a very, I'm not troubled by these ideas in a way.
I hope that we're not so bound by stereotypes, but at least between myself and Fiona, we moved from having a studio to not having one, and we are kind of happy about it. Again, it reminds me of how I have been shifting what studio means in my life and my work, from a space to make and meet people, potential context, to I think now studio is a kind of subject matter of what I'm interested in. So I want to ask close to final question of how studio for you has changed over time. How was it in the past, now, and as well as in the future? I understand Ila is looking for a studio space.
Yeah. I think we're playing with that idea, or toying with the idea, but like I mentioned this earlier, like talking about studio, it always goes back to when I didn't have a studio, right? And we've always been, my partner and I have always been nomadic, like wherever we get. So during residency, that is our studio space. Now it's just we still consider like our house studio as like the studio, but we can also like extend it to residency elsewhere. So it's not bogged down to that studio. So that's how we think about our practice as well. Or my practice is ever changing. It's not specific to the space that I'm in. It's outside of it. And if I have a space to kind of settle in, to hold certain things, to grow certain things, to tend to it and cultivate it, great. But if I don't, then I don't. But what we're also thinking of as a duo, as a pair of independent practicing artists, is to have a studio, much like this, and to kind of explore a studio practice. So to hold workshops, to have screenings, to have talks, but between Bunny and myself. So we've been thinking about that a lot. Also because my daughter is growing up and that is technically her bedroom that we use as a studio. So it would be nice to kind of play around. This is not fixed. Play around the idea of bringing it elsewhere, and maybe much like the both of you, to kind of think of eliminating the physical works, those that we keep in storage. Do we really need to have it? Do we really need to have all this like physical stuff? Or do we want to expand it? I don't know. It all depends on the processes that we get into and how it changes us. Yeah.
Gideon, I understand your lease is ending soon.
Yes.
Yeah. What's next?
A lot of the times we take it one step at a time. So if the landlord doesn't increase the price too much, then I'll probably stay on for another round of 2 years or 3 years. My relationship with the studio has been changing since we started. I mean, we started with 3 by 3 meters, basically storeroom, and then we moved into a home studio where it was a 3-room flat, and we used the living room, and then after that we shifted here. I think having space to make work is definitely a luxury, but recently I'm also experiencing this, like having time to spend time in the studio making work, that it's also in itself a luxury. Like for the past 2 years, I've been doing work that involves going out, maybe teaching, or meetings, or running errands, or any other thing that is not making work, but maybe performing or doing things. And there are like lesser and lesser time spent within the studio. So moving forward, hopefully, I can take back some of that time and spend more time in the studio making things and thinking about the work that we do.
How about you, Rui-An?
I'm kind of also taking it kind of one step at a time in terms of it, because also my practice is quite nomadic. So like, yeah, it also I don't really have a strong aspiration to have like a let's say a permanent physical space in Singapore, especially if I have to rent it, because that I think will give me a lot of anxiety more than giving me any kind of relief. So, but I guess yeah, I mean, whenever I travel for projects these days, I try my best to try to have a more kind of semi permanent place where I can work, rather than like moving from one place to another, which sometimes happens because I'm like, in the past I would probably have to stay at like friends' place or crash at their place when I'm, you know, in a place doing research but on my own budget. So I'm trying to graduate from that situation a little bit. So yeah, so at least, so right now my aspiration is to, yeah, have a bit more permanence in my life, I guess.
We've come to close to the end. Shall we go around for you to share one takeaway from today's discussion?
I was reminded of something Rui-An mentioned earlier, where the space that you're in kind of shapes your personality, maybe even. And I didn't think of that initially. So now I'm wondering if I should be more aware of that, and maybe, maybe just be more aware of how how the space might be affecting how I do things. So, yeah.
Right. Ila?
The takeaway is, it's nice to talk about studio because you kind of see also the progression of, I saw a progression of my own practice, like where it started, where it is now, in relation to the studio that I'm in. Yeah, so it's kind of a nice experiment to go through. Yeah, a kind of nice retrospecting exercise in retrospecting the studios that I've inhabited and how my practice have changed. Also thinking about whether my practice have changed because the studio's arrangement over the years, or is it because, you know, there's one influence the other, or there's, if like Gideon mentioned, or I mentioned, if does the space shape us, or do we shape the space? You know, it could be both. Yeah, so it's a nice exercise to do. Yeah,
I think like today I heard 2 different varying studio setups. Like Gideon has this huge space which was my dream, you know, livable as long as no one finds out. And we also have Rui-An's nomadic, you know, moving around in different hotel rooms. And I think I'm somewhere in the middle now, but I do want to work towards what Rui-An has, because I think on some levels I'm quite rigid. I do need that kind of certainty, knowing that my lease will not end, or knowing that I will have this space. If not, I wouldn't be able to function or plan ahead. So I do want that kind of flexibility in my practice. So if I ever lose my place, which I hope I won't, as long as I have a bedroom, I have a place to work in, I will still be able to work, like going around, no fixed room, no fixed storage. I'll still be able to make works.
Actually, I was thinking about what Fiona was saying about her her objects or artwork getting smaller and smaller. And I was also kind of reflecting on whether, yeah, the nature of my practice is also directly related to, the fact that I don't have a studio in Singapore, or don't have, or the fact that, that relates also to land scarcity and high rents in Singapore, how that actually, made the practice that I have today what it is. So, because in certain ways, I also like whenever, even before I start conceptualizing the work, I almost set some parameters for myself, like, because there are a few times when I do the project that ended up, I made a lot of objects, and then I realized now they're all like accumulating in my house, and and they're just staying lying there and taking up space. So to a certain extent now, when I conceptualize a project, I'm thinking about storage immediately, or how to store this project. And in fact, it becomes quite an important restriction or quite an important parameter around which I work. But on the other hand, I think it fits into my desire to also be a bit more, I guess, ecological in my practice. So I also, to a certain extent, like for me, I usually, in a way, like I try to change the parameter into something that I find productive to work with. How do I also have a practice that's not so, doesn't waste so much materials, or like, how do I reduce like having to ship stuff overseas when I have an exhibition somewhere else? So like, I feel like sometimes restrictions or limitations, they can also become a way to allow you to rethink your practice in ways that can ultimately be, meaningful or productive in the long run. Yeah.
That's such a great way to end this conversation, which, although it's about the studio space, really it's about us reflecting on how we ended up, needing a studio, and how this studio space might reflect or affect how we are as a person and artist. We've come to the end of Spatial Complexes, where we talked about meaning, function, elements, and perceptions of artists and their studio. The next episode, titled Commercial Complexes, will delve into the financial aspects of sustaining a creative practice. If you have any views on today's episode, or if you'd like to suggest some topics or questions for the next episode, please feel free to type into the comment section. Thank you, viewers. Thank you, speakers, for your time and insights. See you in the next episode.